So today we're going to talk a lot about story development. Dun dun dun. The dreaded thing.
Is it really the most dreaded part?
No, I'm just being dramatic. It can be dramatic. It could be dreaded if you hit the block, the writer's wall, if you're not sure, like just trying to figure it out. That can be overwhelming for everybody. And even if you read a lot of interviews or listen to stuff with writers and filmmakers, they're all acknowledge that the creative process is not this. It's not like going to McDonald's and okay, well, I'm going to flip my burgers and just got this procedure I'm going to do over and over again. It's really hard to be inspired and keep that going. And I talked a little bit about it last class about this idea of having a bucket to contain all your ideas and stuff. But if we have time later in the semester, I'll talk about how to be creative and how to approach it, not from like this fantasy world where, oh yeah, these visions are going to fall in my lap and it's just going to happen magically, but the real work behind how do I actually be creative? How do I actually force myself to be creative? Because that's the reality for most people, most filmmakers, most creative individuals, whoever, have to work at being creative. And so it's not a pleasure. Sometimes it can be pleasurable, but sometimes some people look at it as a dreaded process because it's not pleasurable to get that idea out and developed and make it happen. And so we'll see. We might have time to talk about it. Hopefully we will. But today we're going to talk about story development. So remember, we talked about development, right? And this is part of it, finding that concept. So we talked about the concept, right? Finding the idea, adapt from a book, other medium, original idea. It basically boils down to those two things. So mostly, it's better to have an original idea because then you're not making licensing deals and all this stuff with somebody else's other concept. But then finding that original idea can be complicated. And then we talked about the treatment. Remember, I said it's like a 1-page write-up, could be 2 pages describing the story. It's like a brief summary about what the story is about. We include details, characters, locations, plot points, etc. So here's the thing. When you start developing your idea, you should have some questions. You should be able to answer these questions, or a lot of these questions. The first thing is going to be is, while you're writing the treatment, so I have this idea, whatever it is my idea is about, general idea, now I'm going to write the treatment. So as I'm writing the treatment, these questions should be answered in the treatment. Now, how deep you go into these answers is up to you. It shouldn't be huge. Like I said, the treatment should be a 1 or 2 page write-up. So we're not talking about a full breakdown history of your characters all the way to when they were born, all that level of detail. But you need to know what these questions are and how to answer them. So the obvious one is going to be like, what's the story about? You should know what it's about. Like if you have a great idea, I can remember I said last class, it's about a car chase, right? Car race across America, legal car race. Okay, well, what's it more about? How much deeper can you go into that? What's the genre? You should know what your genre is, because it's really important to figure out what a genre is, because if you don't know what your genre is, you might not know who your audience is. And if you don't know who your audience is, well, who are you writing for? Or who are you producing this movie for? So genre is kind of important. And it doesn't mean you have to be locked into a genre, good cop, bad cop, buddy story, sci-fi fiction, romantic comedy. Those are all generic genres. You can have crossovers. You can intermix genres together, but you might want to think about which genres fit together. Or if they're two complete opposite genres, can you combine them together to tell something that's intriguing to people? So we want to think about what the genre is. Is it science fiction? Is it fantasy? Is it documentary? Is it drama? Is it comedy? You should figure out what that is. And then once you kind of have an idea about that, who is the audience? Who are you writing for? And how do you be like, I'm writing for everybody. My film's so awesome that's going to encapsulate the whole population. Everybody's going to love my movie. Good luck. I think Hollywood's still searching for that. They want something. I think the closest that might have come to that might have been the movie Titanic. The Titanic's a great example of a genre movie because they picked a romantic love story and combined it with an action movie and then combined that with a disaster movie. So they took three separate genres, and this is what the genius of Titanic is, whether you like the movie or not. They picked three separate genres, and maybe it's two, maybe it's more, but I think it's three. Brought them together and wrote a script that you could go, husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend could both go to the same movie and enjoy it because there's the love, and I'm not trying to be stereotypical here. I'm just saying in general, that's the mentality went into that movie. Well, I could have just made Titanic as the movie Titanic as an adventure, disaster movie, right? But because I tied in this love story into it, guess how many more people I brought in? A lot more. And so this is a great example of figuring out genre in Titanic and connecting it with audience. So film studios loved that movie because it connected, it was a cross genre movie that everybody pretty much liked. Even if you hate love stories, but you like action stuff, there's a little bit of action at the end. There's disaster. There's enough in that movie for everybody to have a piece of it and like it. And that was the golden goose. That's what, that's why it made so much money. That's why it became such a famous moment in Hollywood history, because of that crossover. So that wasn't done by accident. That wasn't luck. That was them sitting down. What are we going to tell the story about? We're going to talk about the sinking of the Titanic. Okay, wow, great. That's been done before. Everybody knows that story. How are you going to tell that story in a different way? We're going to tell it through the perspective of a love story. Oh, okay. That's interesting. But what about the ending? Oh, well, we're really going to show this ship going down. We're going to show the misery of all these people. We're going to create this action movie at the end. We're going to create this disaster movie and tie it in. So you can see how starting to figure out what your story is and what the genre is and who your audiences are kind of can be an important thing. And then dovetailing on what we just said, what about the story will attract an audience? That's also that you want to think about. So again, if I'm going to use Titanic, well, the people who love, love stories, well, I've got this whole section written about these two characters, star-crossed lovers, right? A little Romeo and Juliet thing going on here. Okay, I've got part of the audience that's going to love that. I've got another part of the audience that loves disaster movies. They want to see what it was like to be on the Titanic as it went down. That's such an epic story that we'll be hearing for the next 100, 200, 500 years. So there's that in it. Okay, well, then there's going to be a bunch of action. There's in the middle, towards the end, they're getting chased by the rich soon-to-be husband, or not really, because they never got married. There's the whole sinking of the ship and escaping that. There's lots of stuff in there. So those are elements of the story that are going to attract an audience. So I want to think about that in the treatment. And then, and again, these not are all in a certain order. I mean, you kind of want to know what the story is, the genre, who the audience, maybe those things, and then get down to the characters. Who's the character or the characters? Who are these people? Rose, who's Rose? Well, Rose is she's a rich young woman who is being forced into a marriage that without love. So she's not happy, and she sees a moment. So she sees this character Jack and falls in love with him. So okay, so there's one of my characters. There's Jack who wins the bet, right? Remember, he plays cards at the beginning. If you haven't seen it, sorry for the spoiler, but he wins the tickets. And him and his buddy get their chance to come to America to start a new life. So here's a poor person who's trying to reinvent themselves, who's actually a little bit of a hustler, gets on the ship. So you can start seeing who these characters are forming. And then we've got the her fiance, who's thinks money can solve everything. And then we have the other woman who struck it rich in oil, right? Who's like new money. So there's all these different characters. Start figuring out who they are. So once we get to that point, then what are the main characters do to achieve their goals? What choices do they make? This is all about choice. This is all about decisions, because what we're trying to do is emulate life, right? People make choices in life. Whether those choices lead to a bad path or a good path is irrelevant, but those are choices that we want to kind of see in these stories. And again, what we're talking about here is traditional story writing. There's exceptions to the rules. You could do some, experimental filmmaking where there really isn't any quite storytelling. You can do, you know, avant-garde. You could try something that, you can be more experimental with your filmmaking. That's totally okay. But if we're talking about trying to make something that's commercial, or something that's, that I'm actually attempting to get sold or make it get into a film festival, I still want to follow these basic ideas to follow it. So main characters, what do they do to achieve their goal? Jack wins the tickets, gets on the ship. He cheats his way into sitting with all the rich people to make them think he's wealthy. He meets her. They start connecting. There's all these different things that each one of them does to achieve their goals. What are the obstacles? Well, obviously in Titanic, well, the soon-to-be husband is one of the obstacles. The ship hitting an iceberg is an obstacle, big one. Lots of that. Who's the antagonist? Who's standing in the way of these characters achieving their goals? Who is your antagonist? So almost every movie has to have an antagonist. And say, well, can't you do a movie without an antagonist? Well, maybe if you're really good, but in the end, there needs to be someone who's challenging or blocking or preventing our main characters, our heroes or protagonists, from achieving their goals.
Oh, well, I thought you were asking who the antagonist was in Titanic. Is it literally the ship sinking?
The ship sinking is one of them, but the
Is it
fiance,
also the Billy Zane? What's his name? Cal?
yeah.
Would he be? Okay.
So there's lots of different, antagonists, and even in that movie, there's multiple stories, right? Because the whole thing's told as a flashback. So we have Rose as an older woman with the crew trying to find the diamond. So there you could see they've even weaved another subplot into this whole story. So they made Titanic a really, he did an amazing job with that movie. I gotta say, when I first remember it coming out, I was like, I don't know about this, man. A love story, who cares about that? But I was wrong, man. James Cameron is a pretty amazing filmmaker. If you look at his whole collection of films he's made, he's been all over the place. It's kind of like Spielberg. Remember I told you Spielberg is like jumped all these genres and everything. You see James Cameron kind of doing that a little bit himself, but he always takes it. This stuff's big though. It's always big. It's bigger than life. So we'll see how he does with the new Avatar movies. So just jumping back here, who these main characters are, their obstacles, who's standing in their way, what will they achieve, what do they want, will this ending be triumphant or not? So what happens at the end of Titanic? Sorry for the spoiler, but if you haven't seen it at this point, well, a little too late. Does Jack get what he wants? No, he dies. Does Rose get what she wants? No, she totally disappears in life. The expedition in the modern times, the guy in charge of the expedition to find the diamond, does he get what he wants? The diamond?
No.
Nope. So really, in the end, the only person who got something in that movie was, if I take it back, is probably Rose. She at the end got her freedom, because that's what it was all about. Remember, she didn't want to be a housewife for some rich person. She wanted to live, and that's why she made the choice to not to identify herself at the end when everybody was rescued, so that they all thought that she perished. And she led this simple, different life, not a rich person's life. So she may have got one of her goals, to have freedom, but that goal came at the cost of losing her true love. So you could see how this is all starting to be written using these ideas and these questions here. So triumph or not. And then at the end, what do the characters learn by the end of the story? And even at the end, remember, she actually had the diamond on a necklace when she was on the ship with them, and she never told them she had it. They were looking for it. What does she do? She throws it away. Finally, freedom, breaking free of that whole experience.
Sorry, I think by the end she's learned that her life is worth living. Because,
maybe.
Yeah, she was suicidal in the beginning, and then by the end, when Jack had saved her yeah, she grows to be an old woman.
I think, yeah, you're right about that. You're right. She was suicidal, so I think you're right. She learned to appreciate life, or learn to. And I think that had to do with her freedom, because maybe at that, before she met Jack, she didn't see a way to get freedom. She just saw her life as this in prison, this rich golden cage that she was going to spend the rest of her life in. And Jack, because he was so free, kind of showed her that. Titanic, like, you could see all these arcs happening in there, in that movie. And a lot of this happens not because it just happens in the writing, but because you sit with a list of questions and really think about what this is about. Because really, when we think about what I'm going to say is traditional filmmaking, storytelling, it's about a journey, right? It's about a character evolving and changing. That's what makes people captivated. That's what people want to see. And if you're trying to be commercial, if you're trying to get into the industry, that's kind of the model you have to kind of approach. And again, I'm not saying that every film is like that. A lot of them are. I'm not saying that's the perfect way to go. It's not. There's definitely exceptions to the rules. One of the ones I'm thinking about is Jacob's Ladder. Anybody see that movie? You even heard of it?
Yeah, I watched that recently actually for the first time.
So what was the narrative in that? What was the story about?
His PTSD, but then spoiler alert, he's having all these like hallucinations and things, and then he found out he was the victim of this experimental gas, was it?
I think so.
Like a war thing.
But it kind of felt like at the end he was already dead.
That it is a very weird film. I thought that he died at the end, but then there's a lot of people that think that like he's in some sort of horrible afterlife, whether it be hell or purgatory or something like that.
Right.
So,
but my but my point of bringing that movie up is because it doesn't follow the hero's journey. It doesn't follow this
right
model that a lot of things, and it still was a commercial film. I'm not going to say it was a big successful film. It definitely has a cult following for sure.
Yeah.
But there are exceptions to the rule. You can find movies that don't fit these models that I'm talking about. And what we're going to talk about today with story development is really about the standard model, what most of the industry is doing, what most Hollywood filmmakers, writers are doing, because that's kind of what works. And it's a kind of proven formula. And I'll get to that in a few minutes when we get down to it. So, we talked about the treatment last class, but today we're just this idea of how do you go deeper into that treatment? And really what that treatment is about is trying to answer as many of these questions as possible. The more of these questions you answer, the more successful you're going to be at writing your script, your story, whatever it is, because you'll have the answers, you'll have it developed. The worst thing in the world is trying to write a script and you're not sure where it's going, and it's just going to happen, right? And again, I'm not saying that's how everybody works. There are certain screenwriters and writers who, man, it's all in here, and they just start typing and boom, it just magically shows up. Probably Stephen King is like one of those type. All the books he's written, man, it's all in here. But not everybody's like that. I know for me, when I try and write stuff, man, that's not me. I gotta iron it all out first before I attempt it, or I'm just gonna make a big pile of mess. So these are guidelines for you guys to think about how you want to try and do stuff. And this, this is definitely about narrative stuff, but guess what? In the documentary world, this still applies. We may know the end of the story, or maybe we don't, because we're following something that's happening in real time. But as in the documentary world, even dare I say reality world, we're still trying to answer these questions. As the story is unfolding in front of us, who's challenging our main characters? Who's the opposition? What's their obstacles? It's all about overcoming obstacles. It's really what movie making is about. If it was all happy and it was smooth sailing, what would that mean for our audience?
Wouldn't have much to look forward to.
But I'm sorry, I fell asleep during the movie. What happened? Oh, yeah, never mind. Right? We don't want to be bored. We're paying money. The audience pays money, whether they're going to the theater or they're paying a subscription service, a streaming service, renting. It doesn't matter what it is. we're being paid to be entertained. We're being paid to be taken away from our normal world for a couple hours or an hour or whatever amount of time it is, and go to some other place, whatever that is, whatever genre I want to dive into. So it's our responsibility as filmmakers to give them a ride, give them something. That's what they're paying for. Now, if you want to be experimental filmmakers, sure, go for it. That's all cool. And I encourage you to play around and try weird stuff, experiment, do whatever you want. But know that those, most people aren't going to have a stomach for that. That's not what they're into. Filmmakers may want to do that. Other filmmakers may appreciate going to see, experimental film or different types of, out of the, outside of the normal fringe genres and stuff. But the general public doesn't want that. They want to be entertained. And that's the truth. And whether you think that's a good thing or a bad, it's kind of irrelevant. So for us, as trying to be filmmakers, we want to address: do I want to be in this world where I'm writing stories for the general population who want to pay money to see this stuff, or do I want to do my own experimental stuff, or do I want a hybrid of both? It's okay, whatever path you want to go. The bigger question answers: where do you want to go? So once we get through all this stuff, now we're going to talk about log lines. Anybody heard of a log line before? So log line is basically one or two sentences that describe the story. So example, middle-aged former superhero turned insurance adjuster yearns to get back into action. There is the log line for The Incredibles. Now think about that for a minute. Does this one sentence pretty much nail what that movie's about? If you haven't seen The Incredibles, then you got to go see it. It's a great one of Pixar's good movie, best movies. So notice that there's an art to log lines, and we'll talk a little bit more about it in a bit. But I want to give enough information for the audience to understand what this movie's about. But I don't want to sit there and write 5 paragraphs to tell them exactly every detail in the movie, because if I do that, then I just ruined it for them. So the goal of the log line, I want to describe the movie because I want to entice them. So why do you think we have log lines? What's the point of a log line? Anybody take a guess?
Sure. I'd say it's to get, I guess, the general idea of a movie to an audience, to get them to understand it. Like the majority, like, because we know that I have seen The Incredibles. One of the movies that we're talking about that I have seen is The Incredibles, and it's just about his family until the very end when he does start to get back into the action. So the logline really encapsulates the idea of the movie that what you're expecting to see, right? Beyond the main points, like this is what you're going to be expected to see. I feel like it's really easy to explain kind of the majority of the movie through the log line.
Okay, yeah. So besides showing, like, letting an audience know about what the movie's about, why could this thing be useful for us?
So for pitching like your story to maybe a producer or something like that.
Bravo. So that's one of them. So logline's gonna get your idea across pretty easy. So pitching. So if you go into a pitch session and they're like, all right, tell me what you got. And you say, well, I got this great movie about these people on a boat, and they're not together, and they sail on this big ship, and the ship crashes, and then you start rambling. What do you think that the producer is going to do? What else you got? I don't know what I've already lost interest. So the idea, log lines can be used for letting your audience know what it is. So if you think about back in the old days, like if you see a movie poster, like they'll have even less than a log line, like 1 or 2 words that kind of describe what is going on. But back in the day when we were going to the movies, and instead of having the internet to look up the movie, you would go in the back of the Sunday papers, and there would be the listings of the movies, and basically there'd be a log line there to tell you what it was about. So that kind of got you intrigued. So this log line serves, in my opinion, 2 functions, and they're both very important functions. The first one is what we just talked about, letting people know what your idea is about without putting them to sleep, without it's a streamlined, short link to what your idea is. So you need that for pitching, because when you go to a pitch session, those producers, those executives, they're expecting you to be ready to go. They're expecting you to, to be this dialed in and super precise that they could hear 1 or 2 sentences and go yes or no. If it takes a paragraph to explain your idea, they've already passed, because in their head, they're like, okay, you're not really that great of a communicator. So if you can't communicate what your idea of your movie is, I'm no way I'm investing money in you just to give you money to make it, because if you can't do that, then I have no faith in you to make a movie. That makes sense? So that's the first function of it. The second function is going to be more about yourself. And so the log line, to me, and also there's a couple philosophies on film screenplay writing that say the log line is the essence of your film. If you can't figure out what the log line is on your film, then you're not ready yet. You haven't developed it enough. I should have a log line on my idea, and I should be able to encapsulate the whole idea of my movie in that log line. And if I can't do that, then I'm not developed yet. That means I have not gone back to this treatment and developed it right. So therefore, I should not be writing a script. And that's the Save the Cat philosophy. Anybody heard about that book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty famous book. It's a great read. So anybody who's interested in screenplay writing, that's one of the books you should read. There's a couple of them out there. There's that one, and then there's the screenplay official book that everyone reads. That's the college book of, oh, here's how you write a screenplay. But Save the Cat is a different perspective on screenplay writing, and what it's about. And I'm not saying it is the best way to write, but it's definitely a great perspective that you need to know about. You need to be the best writer. You want to know all the perspectives, but his perspective is from a Hollywood's point of view. It's not writing Shakespeare. It's not writing a great movie that's, experimental. I mean, it's like, well, if I want to make a movie that I'm going to sell in Hollywood, this is the book I want to read, because this is what it's all about. And so he breaks it all down with the hero's journey, the formula, and part of, you can argue that maybe part of what's wrong with Hollywood today is they follow this model too much, and everything is that model. But that model does work, and it's based off of experiences. It's based off of, storytelling throughout history, humanity. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. But so his whole philosophy is you have to nail the log line. If the log line doesn't tell your idea, then you're not really at the point you need to be writing a script. You need to go back and flesh it out, develop it even more. So it's like a litmus test for your idea. If you can't get it in two sentences, 3 sentences max, and it works, it makes sense, it tells your story, then you haven't figured out your story yet. You need to go back. So I believe in that. I think that is the right path. I think if you can't get a log line going, forget about the pitch sessions and showing your audience what it is. But for yourself as a writer, if it takes a paragraph to explain what your story is about, then you haven't figured it out yet. You haven't found out what the gist of your story is. So we're going to actually do log lines in this class. We're going to start experimenting with this world and jumping into it. So again, if I go back to The Incredibles, this pretty much tells us what it's about. And it's not just a plain old sentence here, right? I've got middle age, right? There's lots of describing words in here. It's not just a superhero yearns to get back into action. It's a middle-aged former superhero, which means was a superhero, no longer a superhero. Oh, turned insurance adjuster. Okay, well, that's weird, right? That means this is going to be a weird, quirky movie. Yearns, misses the old days, wants to get back. So there's a ton of subcontext in this log line here that's more than just the sentence to set it up. And that's a really well-crafted log line is going to be like this. It's really going to have everything in there but not giving away everything.
Can it be a little longer than that?
Yeah, it can be. We're gonna hit this up again. I'm gonna skip to the next section, and then we're gonna talk we'll spend a lot of time talking about log lines. And we'll have multiple examples, and you can see some that are really precise. This is my favorite one because it just nails it perfectly. And there's some that a little bit long, kind of not, but they do get the job done. But like I said, for me, this is the gauge. If I'm trying to develop an idea and I can't put it into a log line, then I need to go back on and think about it and refigure out what my story is. And this is where, in my opinion, a lot of people mess up, where they don't write good scripts or they don't have good films because they never really got their log line down. They never really figured out what's the essence. What is the essence of my story?